Hello and welcome to Spectator TV Australia. I'm your host, online editor Alexandra Marshall. And today, for our first one back after the break, I have James Allan with us today. He is, of course, one of our regular columnists causing an awful lot of trouble. James, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alexandra. Thank you for using the alphabetical order method of picking guests. So I feel that, I win with Allan.
Let's talk about the craziest of last week, okay? We know that the Liberals forced Labor to come back to Canberra to pass urgent laws to deal with the Islamic terror attacks that happened in Bondi. So they trapped themselves, and what they ended up with was a political disaster. So, James, did the Liberal Party, not the coalition, the Liberal Party, betray free speech values in Australia?
Well, it's obvious they did that. On the tactics, I don't mind them forcing Labor to come back and do something, but you're not obliged to agree with everything they put forward. I mean, the Andrew Hastie line, and I think he really shot himself in the foot, is if the Libs hadn't sort of supplicated themselves at the feet of the great Albo, then he would have made a deal with the Greens. It would have been a worse deal. That is not what a party that has any values does. What you say is this legislation is so bad, Mr. Albanese, that you go ahead and pass it with the hard left socialist Greens. We will use that to win the next election. We will make a we will run on how awful this legislation is. We will commit to repealing it, even if that requires a further double dissolution election. Mr. Albanese would have folded like a wet noodle. But they just agree with this. We've got people like Julian Leeser who wanted to pass the racial vilification parts of the law.
We improved Labor's laws to have that reckoning with eradicating anti-Semitism and removing radical Islamic extremism. That's actually what this was about. And we're proud in the Liberal Party that we stood firm for that. The door is open from my point of view, Carl, but I'm not looking at the door. I'm looking straight out at the beautiful landscape and communities of this country I love and the fight that I have every single day, proud of the team I lead to do exactly that.
I mean, and the worst part is this conceit from the sort of, they call themselves the moderate wing of the Liberal Party, but it's more like the Labor light wing. But they sort of bill themselves as latter day John Stuart Mill type small government classical liberals. This is a joke. They were the worst thugs in the party room during COVID, the ones all in favor of every restriction going, not a single one of them, resigned from the cabinet or anything else. And then there they are in lockstep with Labor to bring in these hate group laws. And they're bad laws. I mean, the definitions are incredibly loose. The safeguards basically non-existent. Hurt feelings of somebody not a reasonable person in the community at large. Somebody in the target group can trigger you being put into a hate group. The prison sentences are massive, way higher than common assault.
Let's talk about this, James, because we obviously had the Liberals saying, oh, we'd quite like to write our own version of the hate speech laws, which didn't go down particularly well. But if they had allowed the Greens and Labor to draft laws which would have essentially made it a 15-year prison sentence to defend biological women in sports, which would have been a huge election winner for the coalition had they let that go through. But we also had things like, well, sure, the Liberal Party can sit down with Labor and change the law, but there was nothing, I believe, James, stopping the Liberals from at the last minute going, you know what, just kidding, we're going to vote against the law. They could have
Nothing,
done that,
nothing.
couldn't
You're not forced to agree. They should have opposed this. The job, if you think a law is bad, you oppose it. They just haven't learned. The greatest opposition leader in the last 30 years was Tony Abbott. He opposed stuff on principle. Once he got into office, he wasn't as good at it, but
Yeah, but James, now they have to run the next election having supported these laws.
yes, they do. Now, I mean, I don't know who. I think Sussan Ley's going to be rolled. Andrew Hastie's compromised in a pathetic sort of way. Angus Taylor can say, "Well, I didn't vote for these laws." Make Jacinta Price his deputy. She didn't vote for the laws, and just lay down the law that on reflection we're going to repeal them. Uh, That would be what I do. Now, could you get that through the? I mean, the real danger is that Hastie was being calculating and figuring, if I vote for this when we roll Lee, the over 50% of the party room that are lefty Labor light types will vote for him. I mean, I think even they've given up on Sussan Ley. I mean, the only beneficiary of this is One Nation, because they do seem to have a strong commitment to reducing, getting rid of these horrible speech hate group type laws. It's going to cripple the National Party. They are going to lose seats everywhere.
To be perfectly fair to One Nation, all the new rise in the polls is well earned over 30 years.
Listen, every country in the world is worried about mass immigration. Almost everyone outside of Canberra type bubbles realizes multiculturalism has been a massive failure. Nobody back in the 70s and 80s would have voted for this if you'd shown them what they were going to get. It has been done by the political class. They use speech inhibiting laws because they are terrified of what people are saying about what they've done to our countries, Britain, Australia, Canada. And then they wonder why Donald Trump wins and does what he says, and I think J.D. Vance will win in 2028. So, I mean, it would be nice to have an opposition party that opposed. I still think that if Dutton had come out last year and just said, we are going to slash immigration to almost nothing, and we are going to get rid of all of the net zero garbage, which now they want to do anyway, he would have won. But he had no courage. He didn't stand up to his advisors. It was just pathetic.
James, let's talk about the remaining options for the Liberal Party, because basically the Nationals aren't going to rejoin the coalition unless they change Sussan Ley out of the leadership. That's basically what they're saying to us. So what do they have as an option? They could put through Angus Taylor, who just happened to be off having a lovely holiday and didn't have to make a comment. And he didn't make any public comment. There's internet where he is
Yes, I
holidaying.
know, but Alexander, we are in a world now where he looks better than anyone else because they voted for it.
But in my view, James, that was a position of extreme weakness, to wait and see whether public opinion fell instead of supporting the principled position, right? So that's my problem.
Do you prefer the hasty option of voting for it?
No. So I'm going to go. So Angus Taylor fails to me because he didn't have the guts to make a choice. Hasty basically berated his own supporters because he's supporting a bill that he said he wouldn't.
Last week, Labor presented a bill which was terrible, and we gutted it like a fish. What was left were some significant changes to the Migration Act, making it easier to deport militant Islamists, as well as banning groups like Hizb ut-Tahrir, which support them. I think this is in the national interest, and that's why I voted for it.
Then we've got Tim Wilson's the next option, the tealest of the teal.
During a time of national crisis, leaders shouldn't be throwing tantrums.
Which the moderates were quite
Not only that, he sold himself as a big free speech proponent, terrible during COVID, and he voted for this, and he hasn't got a free speech bone in his body.
No,
he
but he's
far
a teal.
worse than the other two.
But he's a wet and he's a teal, so the moderates will like him as a replacement. And then, of course, you've got the last one, which is Ted O'Brien, the shadow treasurer. Now, out of all those people, I'm not seeing anybody who can actually save the Liberals.
Well, if your test is save the Liberals, I probably agree with you. If you want an ordinal ranking based on their behavior in the last 2 weeks, I think, as bad as it was, Taylor's in the best position. The other ones all voted for the bill. I mean, Taylor didn't vote for the bill for whatever sort of pusillanimous reason. So that's better. It's better. I mean, it's on a scale of bad, it's better. And I think he would probably find a way to make Price his deputy. And she also didn't vote for the bill. Yeah. I know. Again.
James, we're not the dog ate my homework excuse. Sure, there might have been a problem with the bells, but the fact that she wasn't in there or paying attention, and that her colleagues didn't text one of the most prominent members of the Senate wasn't there and no one told her. Everyone is sitting there looking at that going, that is not acceptable no matter why it happened. If you want to be a leader or in a front cabinet position, that wasn't good.
You're talking in an ideal world where we had other choices. Of the 4 choices you've given me, Taylor's the best because he didn't vote for the bill. whatever the reasons. It's like someone not, at a university not agreeing with his colleagues to cheat on an assignment and coming up with some pathetic excuse. The other ones all cheat. At the end of the day, I think Hastie just ruined his chances. And you're right, doubling down. If he'd come out right away and said, I was incredibly cowardly, it was a terrible mistake, I wholeheartedly apologize, and I will do everything I can to repeal this. People aren't perfect. We would cut people some slack.
Well, we have to give the Nationals some credit for this one, because it's not very often. I think that the rise of One Nation has scared the heck out of the Nationals, and they have gone, we better show a backbone, or the regional areas of Australia will turn orange. And so we saw...
Look at on the current polling, they could get up to 40 seats, 41 seats. Many of those would come at the expense of National. Nobody really thinks Littleproud has got much of a backbone, but they have been the polling has terrified them into doing things they should have been doing for a long time. I love Matt Canavan. And we should make a point of congratulating Alex Antic.
I oppose both in their entirety, and I'm going to be crossing the floor, it looks like, to vote against the hate groups bill as well. We don't really need any more laws in this country. Many of you will agree with that, I'm sure. We actually need a lot less. And there are so many issues with these bills that I really don't have time now to list them all. And if the bill passes, it expands the state coercive powers really in a way that risks eroding core freedoms under the guise of protecting us against hate. It makes no sense.
We always say Alex Antic is excluded from everything bad we say about the Liberal Party because he has been the most principled member of the party. People want him to be Prime Minister, James.
Well, the problem is all the factions, and there's at least 8 people. Like, does Julian Leeser think he'll stay in shadow cabinet if Hastie or Taylor become leader? Not a chance. Maybe with O'Brien, that's the problem with him. Tim Wilson. If Tim Wilson becomes leader, then the party's just dead. I mean, completely dead. The guy's got one of the most marginal teal seats. He hasn't done anything on principle you can think of. For God's sakes, they can't make him leader. So, it's quite depressing. Although I've started to come around thinking, let's just blow the whole thing up. With any luck, some of the Nationals will move over to One Nation. And if the Liberals aren't careful, they're going to start losing some of their own MPs to One Nation.
Well, here's a great thing you'll enjoy. They're talking about a One Nation plus the Nationals as one national. And that could, if they played their cards right with a couple of the independents, they could form the opposition if the Liberals aren't
okay. And get rid of Littleproud can't be leader. Just can't.
No, but so we've got the One Nationals, and people are saying, okay, well, what if we had the Wets plus the Teals? What would we call them? And someone said, we could call them the Weasels, but I thought maybe the Twits would be a good one as well. Yes, what do you think about them, the new party of the Twits or the Weasels?
Look, the so-called moderates who are just Labour left, they don't stand. I mean, the irony is that people they are calling far right and hard right, and I've been called out at times. Basically, you can't put a piece of paper between my views and those of John F. Kennedy. They have moved so far left. They're calling themselves centrists, but 15 years ago they would have been, in Bob Brown's party. And so why do we allow them to set the sort of terminological ground rules where somehow they are in the center? They are so far to the left. They are supporting, they want to support a net zero agenda that's crippling us economically, and every other country on earth is starting to backtrack. Most of them never played in the first place. So, somehow we have to get them out of the party. They have hijacked the Liberal Party machinery. They're like cuckoos. And as long as they're running the party, it's broken. And we have really big problems. So it's a little glimmer of hope that One Nation is doing as well. I personally, not everyone's going to agree with this, I don't think the party can win with Pauline Hanson. I admire her principle. And she has done really good things. But the party would be higher in the polls and would do better with, say, Barnaby Joyce leading. You just have to win some inner city. You just have to win some city votes. And there's only so many she's ever going to win. Whereas Barnaby is an excellent retail politician. He really is. Now, does he have the strength of character and convictions of Pauline? Probably not. Because remember, he allowed the Nationals to sign up to net zero. He allowed the Nationals to
through gritted teeth. Let's be honest,
Through
he
gritted
was
teeth,
very
but
clearly
again,
unhappy.
if we're looking for character, and he allowed the National Party to stand by while Malcolm Turnbull axed Abbott without saying we're leaving, again through gritted teeth. But it would be nice for someone, rather than gritting their teeth, to actually do something. But again, I think he would get the One Nation vote. But let's put it this way: the Libs would be petrified if Barnaby Joyce becomes the leader of a sort of One Nation national party. The Libs are in big trouble, big trouble.
That would be the new Menzies party if that was the case, because Barnaby Joyce does have the charisma to carry a movement. He is like a bit of a Nigel Farage, especially if he's not being pushed down by the machine of the coalition, which kept him quiet, sat him on the back bench and said, "We don't want you." Well, Barnaby's got a lot left to give in the life of politics. And I'll say one final thing on this matter is that Sussan Ley didn't have to make this a coalition dividing issue. She could have done what the Greens and Labor said, which was rush laws, vote how you like. We're not going to penalise you if you vote no. We're just going to let it go for this one. Instead, she
Well,
made
you
it
know what
about
the problem is, that most of the Liberal Party would have voted yes anyway.
yeah, but she
I
did
mean,
make it about
that's
her
how
leadership.
pathetic they are.
She made it about loyalty to her and the party instead about loyalty to the people. And let's move on. I've got a different topic here for you. Of course, before we do Trump, because I want to talk about Trump, I want to make one statement about the Greens, because they're also becoming a bit of a nightmare. They are the party that says they're about environmentalism, and yet their favorite country on earth is communist China, the biggest emitters of carbon in the world, the biggest polluters of the world's rivers and waters, the biggest plastic contributors to the oceans of the world. They are the biggest mining polluters. They do deep sea mining, destroying the ocean. They are the biggest overfishers of krill. They destroy coral reefs, and they might be just about to start another war. So why do young people think that the Greens are about environmentalism when everything they support and say is radical communism?
Well, I agree with you. My wife and I, we lived in Hong Kong before the handover. And so in the early 90s, we traveled around China. It was bad in the early 90s. Now, of course, to defend China, which is not, I'm not in the game of doing, they've lifted a hell of a lot of people out of poverty, but they are not an environmental utopia. So that's point one. Point two is you have to be careful. You have to disaggregate how you're generalizing. So young people in Australia lean left and lean green, but all sorts of polls in Canada, say recently, are showing that young people want to vote conservative. Massively, a significant majority are telling pollsters they won't vote for the sort of left-wing blob liberal in Canada. The Liberal Party's left, as it is here, to quip, or NDP. So in Canada, it's the old over 65 boomers who are keeping Mark Carney in power. And that's because they have an opposition, a conservative leader, Poilievre, who stands for things, tells the young people what he's going to do to make the country good. He's offering a sort of conservative package. It's no wonder that I don't blame young people here for supporting the Greens. I mean, really, what's the difference between Tim Wilson and the Greens? What's the difference between Julian Leeser and the Greens? What's the difference between it's not like anyone's offering them an image of the world where they might say, hey, that's pretty attractive. And you'll know, and one of the things that's happened in Canada because of this is that Mark Carney has been scared into massively slashing the immigration intake, which has already lowered rents in Canada. If the Libs were coming out strong and saying we're going to slash the immigration, and every day that goes by, this is what Albo's doing, I guarantee you the immigration intake would be way down. Carney caved in about 2 weeks. And so what are the real problem in this country is we have a right of center establishment party that is completely broken. And either we destroy it or we try to fix it, but neither option is easy to do.
James, the smartest thing conservatives in this country could do if they want to win the next generation at the polls is to start telling the truth about environmentalism, to say we were part of the scam, the money-making scam of net zero, which had nothing to do about the environment you love. They should drag out all the skeletons from the closet, tell all the secrets behind the scenes, and show the Teals, the Greens, and Labor for what they really are. And I think that would actually upset a lot of the young Australians who do care about the environment. They just don't realize the parties they vote for don't.
And while you're at it, point out that anything that is in terms of the global environment, we don't make any difference at all. We're under 1%. We could go back to the Stone Age tomorrow, and I think that's the goal for Labour,
Yeah,
and it
we're
wouldn't
heading
make
that
any
way.
difference at all. We are heading that way.
So
So get ready to live to 22.
let's talk about our favorite topic amongst us before we leave here today, and that is Donald Trump. Now, with Greenland, this stumped so many commentators. I'm not sure why they don't understand how a New York property developer does politics by this stage, but they still don't understand Trump. He basically said, "Hey, we'd like to have Greenland," and they all panicked and thought he was serious. And in thinking Trump was serious, the European Union and NATO sent about 12 guys in a dog sled to defend Greenland, which was, of course, Trump's point that NATO can't defend Greenland. So he showed the whole world how incompetent they were, and now he's got a deal.
And Greenland, basically, their defense is 2 dog sleds. Do you know that? You know what their defense is? 2 dog sleds. You know what Denmark did recently to boost up security in Greenland? They added 1 more dog sled. It's true.
Why, James, do all of our commentators and our politicians fail to understand modern politics? Why can't they work it out?
Well, you need background. So since about 1980, the Americans have spent $22 trillion on NATO defending Europe. And they have spent $22 trillion more than all the other NATO countries put together. Basically, especially after the wall came down a decade later, so 1990, the rest of Europe has just stopped spending on defense, which has allowed them to run these bloated welfare states. And then multiculturalism meant they're bringing in all these third world immigrants who immediately go on welfare. It's the worst possible system. But what they didn't do was spend on defense. And so it's ill-becoming of European, and to this day, even with all of Trump's threats and Obama's threats and Bush's threats, there's only one NATO country, I think, well, leave aside Poland, which actually spends on defense. Of the major countries, only Britain gets over 2% of, which is the limit specified in the NATO treaty. Only Britain spends 2% on GDP, and even then, it's creative accounting, counting pensions and stuff. France doesn't. And what really galls me as a native-born Canadian, Canada's down around 1.2%. It couldn't, literally couldn't defend Green. You got Carney saying we'll defend Greenland. The Canadian Army is sort of as enervated and broken and emasculated as Australia's. We in Australia have not kept our defense spending up, and this goes back to a problem with Howard and Abbott. They're so afraid of cutting welfare spending. And when you look what Trump has done with getting, they've got about 2 million people out. So the employment numbers for native-born Americans are got 2 million new jobs, but 800,000 jobs have been lost by effectively illegal immigrants. That's great. You've got net negative immigration, and you've got a 4.5% GDP increase, which means that the working class are booming in the U.S. And this is before his law kicks in on no tax on tips and no tax on, what's the other one? Overtime.
I don't think it's just about budgetary concerns, because somehow the Liberals and Labor always find several $100 billion tucked away somewhere for a football stadium or for welfare or for foreign aid or for the green renewable section, which is about $1 trillion in the next year or so. They've always got money for what they want. But I don't believe that modern leaders think the world will go to war. They don't believe China will attack a Western nation. They don't believe Russia will go beyond Ukraine. They don't believe that the Middle East will actually start attacking Western European assets. They don't think it will happen. When, of course, we know from every page of human history, we know that when the world's biggest superpowers are bored, are overfed, have lots of money, and have a huge military, we know they go to war. They have to go forward. They can't just sit there and let their assets rot. And we can't even defend the port of Darwin. We can't even defend the port of Darwin.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with almost everything he said. Go read Thomas Hobbes, back in the late 1500s or whenever he wrote, I think it was late 1500s. We live in a dangerous world. I think that what Western leaders believe isn't so much that we don't live in a dangerous world. I think what they believe is it doesn't matter what we do, the Americans will come to our aid. And I think what Trump is doing is saying, well, maybe we won't. Maybe we won't until you guys stop being sort of overindulgent countries that just really won't spend on your own defense. So you'll notice that the Americans have no trouble with Poland or Hungary. And the other interesting thing about Trump is he has long, and I think what brought him into politics was what he saw in Iraq. He does not want to put American boots on the ground. He's perfectly happy to go and take Maduro. He's perfectly happy to, send bombers into Iraq and blow up nuclear institutions. But he's not going to send, tens of thousands or thousands of American troops into some hostile country and see them be slowly murdered, as we saw in the Middle East. He won't do that. He was never going to invade Greenland. He's never going to invade Canada.
The fact that people thought that to me, and that the king went to Canada to give a speech. What's the king going to do to defend Canada if America arrived over the border? I mean, it is just the most bizarre world. We are living in this alternate reality, James, where our leaders appear to be genuinely stupid. And they call Trump an idiot, and yet Trump is playing them all like a fiddle every time he gets out of bed in the morning. I mean, the man barely sleeps, and he's basically having to police the whole world, solve the problems of the last 40 years of bad politics, and fix America. It's no small time.
Look, this is what I like. So by deporting or having them leave voluntarily over 2 million illegals already, and sending in the National Guard to places like Washington, D.C. and some of the hellhole big cities, the murder rate in the U.S. has dropped now per capita to the lowest it's been since the year 1900. The U.S. is now effectively, outside of 3 or 4 big Democrat-run cities, safer than Australia, even with all the guns. And the New York Times runs headlines, "We can't understand why the murder rate dropped." They know perfectly well why the murder. Trump has to operate. If you're a conservative, you have to operate knowing, and this is public information in the U.S. because donations are public information, somewhere around 95% of journalists in the legacy media vote left. They shape stories in a way that helps the left. They exhibit no balance. And if a story is very favorable, they just often don't run it, or they run it 15th. So, of course, there's all sorts of ways and sometimes it's not even deliberate. It's just, if you have a view of the world that is very left, then you will shape that will shape how you present things. I would like the Liberal Party or One Nation to come out and say, we are going to shut down the ABC. It does not represent 50% of the people in this country. Anyone who wants it, feel free to buy it on subscription. You want to know how many people are going to buy the ABC if you have to pay for it yourself? So this is like a tax on half the country to deliver effectively CNN or MSNBC to the half of the country who doesn't have to pay for it themselves. And we're funding Philip Adams' viewing habits, or Peter Fitzsimmons.
They're literally talking about adding a tax, or flirting the idea of adding a tax to pay for the gun buyback legislation. Now, that wasn't disclosed when they were putting this thing through. But look, James, unfortunately, we are running out of time. I'd like to thank you so much for joining us here today.
Well, Happy New Year, Alexandra. Let's make this a better year than last year.
Yes, Happy New Year, and of course, Happy Australia Day for Monday. And let's hope it is a great and a better year than 2025, as you have said.
Yes, and as someone who comes from a long line of Scots Canadians, Sunday today is actually Robbie Burns Day. So there you go.